Okay, we are live on Facebook and on all Warrior Women in Business channels. I'm very excited today. I'm excited, but I'm also saddened by what we're going to talk about. But we are bringing to light a very, very important issue this afternoon on Warrior Women in Business, episode number 23. We're going to be talking about the unfortunate surge of suicide cases pertaining to COVID, and we're going to talk about uh, what's to blame, what's happening, and I have some amazing guests on. They're going to talk about their journeys. They're going to be talking about support that's available for anyone that you may know that's going through isolation, going through problems with money and the economy. I wanted to kick this off by just, thanking everybody for coming today and listening to us. And I want to thank our panelists, which I'm going to introduce shortly. So before we get started, my name is Jasmine Sandler. For those of you who don't know me, I own a company called JS Media here in New York. We're 14 years old, and our mission is to help women in business thrive and grow, and also help women in the homes. Warrior Women in Business is a member organization that takes place in the form of this podcast as well as events. And anybody that's been to one of our events knows that a big part of our events is to help women that are struggling. So we do a lot to raise money and raise awareness for women's and charities that affect women and children, besides doing all the things that we do to support women in business. So I wanted to kick off episode 23 by just kind of introducing, the panel and talking a little bit about, the urgency of this. Before I get into who the panelists are, if you missed our last episode 22, we're very lucky to have a spokesperson from the New York City Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence, an issue that I am personally very, very interested in solving for many issues. And we had a wonderful episode with lots of resources and information, and I think we'll have the same today. So I want to start by introducing who our panelists will be today. We have, again, from the New York City Mayor's Office, who's been so generous to support me in my mission to help women in New York City. We have Janice Chisholm, and hopefully I'm saying the name right, obviously. Most people I'm connecting with for the first time, so they will, I'm generally the titles and names they will fix. But Janice is a Bureau Director of the Division of Mental Hygiene. It's for any of you that want to get in touch with them. It's NYCDOHMH is the acronym. And she has served in responsible positions at the New York City Department of Health and Hygiene for close to 20 years. And I really wanted to have someone from the city on, and we do have also our counterpart and folks in Canada on today, but I wanted to have somebody here at home on who knows what's going on the front lines, who really understands how people can get support. So I really want to thank Janice for taking the time out to be on today. We have Jen Houston from Canada on, and she reached out to me on LinkedIn. The woman is amazing. She's a founder of Canadian Women Healing Our World. And anybody that knows me, I'm a big fan of Canada. I run the Hockey Players in Business, New York City, and we constantly take trips up there. And she's doing really great things. Her mission is to provide opportunities for personal growth and healing to women. And as we talk about in Warrior Women in Business, a woman can't succeed in business until she is whole internally as well. It's not just about doing business deals. So thank you, Jen, for being on, and we're excited to hear from you today. We have Deborah Max, she was my personal guest for episode 14, where we talked about sexual abuse. She also was a speaker at my December 9th Warrior Women in Business event to support raise monies and awareness around domestic violence. So Deborah Max is an advocate, author. Her title and her name, which she'll get into, is the Thorazine Goddess. She's very cool. And she does a lot to help people she helps people primarily that are coming into the hospital where she works to help them through mental health issues. And she's been doing that for close to 20 years. So thank you, Deborah, also for being on. So I'm going to take everybody off of mute now. And I want to jump right into the questions. And I'm going to go kind of in the order that I started, as well any of you panelists, if you want to expand a little bit on who you are in your answers, please feel free to do so. So my number one question to you is, humans are social in nature. This is, goes back to the beginning of time. And so I want to know, starting with Janice, what do you think is the effect on social distancing, isolation to suicidal thoughts, tendencies? And is there any stats or experience you can share in the correlation between social distancing, isolation, and the surge of suicide? So I'll start with you, Janice.
Thanks so much for your question, Jasmine. And first, I want to thank you for the invitation. And to clarify, I'm joining you from the City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And I think it may be that the mayor's office connected us.
Yes.
And so the City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene is very happy to be a part of this conversation. To your question, Jasmine, my first thoughts are words are powerful. And, perhaps instead of using social distancing, we want to consider saying physical distancing. That way we won't reinforce the idea that physically being separated from friends, family, and others translates to social disconnections. So I think if we start there in sort of setting the tone for, putting it out in a way that itself doesn't become a part of the issue. That said, COVID-19 pandemic can affect you and your loved ones' mental and emotional well-being. And it's natural to feel overwhelmed, sad, anxious, and afraid. This is a big deal for all of us. Physical distancing can feel isolating, and that can feel isolating for anyone and everyone. It can be harder for people who struggle with thoughts of suicide. Many people are also experiencing financial distress, loss of friends and family due to COVID, and other significant stressors that can affect mental and emotional well-being. I think the message that I'm sure my colleagues would share with you and with all of those listening to us is that it's important to keep connected and to reach out. Staying connected with family, friends, and social networks using the variety of communications available, email, social media, video conference, telephone, FaceTime, Skype. I'm sure I'm not naming everything. But really, even as simply as calling a neighbor or an older adult, people who live alone that to see how they're doing, to show you care, that can be reinforcing for both of you. Reaching out to others can benefit the individual who's doing the reaching out as much as it benefits the person who's being reached out to. So I think if we were to sort of change the scenario a little and be careful of the words that we use, and instead of saying social, maybe physical distancing, and then reinforcing the need to stay connected and to reach out.
Yeah, no, I really love that you say that, because the whole term of social networking, being social, and when you say social distancing, it does have this strange connotation that you need to stay away from people. And I think I love what you said, because it is about being connected that gives us comfort in a very unstable time, right? So I echo your words. I'm gonna go right to Jen. So Jen, what do you have to say on this subject?
Well, I know by nature, and it's proven that we are biologically wired to want to connect. So I think we're all experiencing that for sure. But I guess depending on our emotional intelligence and how we're coming to this whole pandemic and this crisis with, will be really dependent on our response to it. I read an article in Psychology Today by Glenn Sullivan. It was written on March 22nd of this year. And he really pointed to the idea that, yes, absolutely social, this isolation, but 1 in 3 people that follow through with suicide are actually also unemployed. So, and if we compare what's going on now to the 1929 stock market crash, where there was a 50% increase according to this article and this PhD, Glenn Sullivan, I can't even imagine how people are really managing right now. I can sense it, I feel it. And, you know, and I think all of the things that Janice mentioned are absolutely critical. Staying connected and making sure that you check in with people that you know are actually isolated and alone at home as well.
Yeah, no, and you're right. I mean, we're going to get into that. I'm so happy you brought that up, and we're going to get into that today. The effect of economic loss. It's something that I've seen that's you know, because you know my company serves business owners, but business owners are people too, and you know it's a whole struggling with the economic loss is something that's very hard for people to deal with on a mental and emotional issue. So getting into that, Deborah, I know that you're, you know, you're on the lines, you're in the hospital, you're working with people. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen, if anything, experience around, you know, this whole thing about people being isolated? How has that affected some of your patients or people that you've seen?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and I was planning on, I'm sure I'll touch on it later as well, but we also have to look at the lack of physical touch is huge. Just as much as we're social creatures, we do need human touch, and that's missing for a lot of us right now. I also think a big issue, and this kind of contributes to increased suicide risk, is this certain identity confusion that people are experiencing now. Most of us identify in a large part with our jobs. And for those that are not allowed to present at work or have to work from home or can't work at all and they were laid off, well, there goes a large part of their identity. And that identity confusion is big and can certainly contribute to feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, and suicide. But I think the most dangerous thing about you know, the current state of, I don't want to, distancing, is because of our lack of contact, it kind of increases this very surreal feeling. And I think that level of surrealism is very, very dangerous for someone who's contemplating suicide. If they're kind of in this, I don't know, kind of like in the in-between and not feeling that things are real, they can be at very, very significant risk to attempt or complete suicide. So it can be very dangerous. So there's that disconnect, there's the identity and role confusion, and just the surreal nature of today's world.
So, you know, that a question that might be for you and the other panelists is that feeling of reality, right? So you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, being grounded in something, right? So what have you seen in your work that helps maybe people feel more grounded in this time?
It's tough. I mean, I think it's wonderful. I mean, I can only imagine what we'd be looking at right now if this pandemic occurred 20 years ago and we didn't have the technology to stay, you know, somewhat connected. So that definitely helps things. But I also think there are certain skills that folks, you know, and I'm a survivor as well. There are certain skills that we have learned. We're almost in some ways better suited to deal with these types of crises than the general public who may not have struggled with mental health issues or abuse issues or substance abuse recovery issues. So as far as things that help, there are some very concrete things that people can do. The key thing to focus on, you know, in a Reader's Digest version is try to focus on the things that you can control in this environment where we have so little.
Yeah. I love that point. Okay. Next question. You know, each of you, and I'm going to start with Janice. Each of you represents supporting a different type of, you know, group that you serve, right? So from the general public, right, Janice, to, you know, specifically women, Jen, and Deborah, you know, the people that you're dealing with in the hospital situation. So, you know, everyone has different issues that they're coming to the table with. Like, you know, suicide is so broad. It can be a young person, right? Traditionally, that's been an issue. It can be certainly, I think now, like you were talking about, Deborah, this loss of identity, certainly something that we do talk about at Warrior Women is we definitely talk about men and we talk about relationships. And I think men losing their jobs and having that loss of identity and they're tying that into their happiness, you know, this definitely seems to be an issue. So I just want each of you, starting with Janice, to talk about your specific organization or service, who, just so the audience understands, who it helps and how in terms of mental health and suicide prevention support.
Sure, thanks, Jasmine. So the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene focuses on health concerns for all New Yorkers. This is both mental and all kinds of health. And so the Division of Mental Hygiene focuses on SMI, developmental disabilities, substance use, justice-impacted populations, et cetera. And for this, the response to the pandemic, we are a part of a structure that is really responsible for resourcing and responding. So the Mental Health Emergency Resource Group is responsible for making sure that behavioral health needs of New Yorkers are considered during this pandemic, and that we anticipate and plan for behavioral health needs post-pandemic. So we're looking at kind of what's emerging, as well as planning for long-term. We're sharing reliable information and resources on a regular basis. We collaborate with behavioral health partners across the city, and we're, aimed at strengthening existing resources so that they're responsive to the current needs, some of which are different from, during non-pandemic times. And, mostly what we're trying to do around mental health is to promote coping and resiliency for all New Yorkers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So can you just kind of visualize a little bit how, just briefly, what that looks like in terms of from both a proactive and reactive standpoint? So in other words, somebody reaches out to you, your organization, what does that look like versus, you're spreading the message and helping folks, just so people here can kind of understand a little bit about, what they can expect.
Sure. So largely the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene contracts with a variety of community-based organizations and others to deliver direct services, whether it's mental health or other types of services. So we ourselves at the department are not necessarily, the providers of care, though we do have some services that are provided directly from the department, AOT and various others. But in terms of messaging, as I said, we're emphasizing coping and emotional well-being. We have a webpage on the DOHMH website that is available to anyone who wants to get a variety of resources. Right now, for example, we have a few documents: COVID-19, staying connected with friends and family. Is it anxiety, a panic attack, or COVID-19? Coping with stress during infectious disease outbreaks, grief and loss during COVID-19 outbreak, etc. So there are a number of resources that we push out on a fairly regular basis to try to make sure that the public is informed, has access to a variety of resources, and is aware of sometimes that might just be anxiety. It may not actually be COVID-19. These are things that, so I would point folks to our website, and I will speak a little bit more about that a little later, because I think you asked a question that also points to it. But that's really kind of the work of the department, is trying to both stay in contact with the various direct deliverers of service to assess what's going on right now, how do we need to change services so that they properly address the current needs, and also ourselves pushing out materials both to provide guidance to those behavioral health providers, as well as to attend to some of the questions that the public may have.
Okay, that's great. I think I like the fact, that there's a sense of control, and I think that the public needs to understand that, in terms of there are resources out there and people don't need to feel so alone. And I think I like that you talked about the resilience and coping. It's hugely important. Sorry, you were going to say something?
No, I'm just agreeing with you. Yes, that's what we're trying to promote and also just to let folks know that really there's a place to call. For example, our New York City Well line, one can call, text, or chat. And have noticed that there's been quite an increase in volume since the pandemic. And that's a good sign, we think, because folks are outreaching to get information and to get help and to ask questions. We take that as a good indicator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Okay, so I'm going to move on to Jen. Can you talk a little bit about, just summarize your organization, who you help around, either around mental health or suicide, or specifically what you do?
Hey, thanks, Jasmine. Yeah, so I work in two sort of capacities. As Jen Hewson, I take on clients, women that come to me with a lot of trauma and need support getting through and moving toward healing. So I use all sorts of different techniques. I am NLP trained. I also use art therapy, talk therapy, role playing. We do all sorts of things, and we really get to the core of the trauma, this emotional pain that people are carrying with them. And it's a process. It takes time. And then on the other side, I work around social equity with women that are in sort of the system, that are sometimes in homes, they're escaping domestic violence, they have attempted or a suicide, and I'm working through the Canadian Mental Health Association, kind of like what Janice said. I'd be someone they might reach out to provide a program to specific women. And so those are my two sort of capacities. I guess my work really is really about getting to the core of the trauma. And I'm not a doctor. I don't treat things clinically, but I really think of, reconnecting your mind, body, and spirit, and really asking people to do some really deep emotional work on what it is they're carrying around with them that is taking them to the places where they feel like their life isn't worth living. A lot of times it's around their core beliefs and what they believe about themselves, the stories they've told themselves, the programming they've had in their life, and that it's really working with them individually. And it's called the Soul Journey. That's the name of my program, because everyone's story is their story. And so that's a little bit about the work I do. I have had women come to me from all different entry points, from off the street to, working top 7-figure executives. So I've worked with all sorts, and, people do have trauma. It doesn't really matter your financial status in all circumstances. When you're feeling this way, you can have every financial, all of those things in the world and still not feel complete and happy. So in my program, I really help women in particular to come to those places of healing in all sorts of ways, and really discover meaning and purpose in their life.
Oh, that's really, really wonderful. It really is. And, I applaud you. And I also understand that I like what you're talking about in terms of there's no economic, it's not siloed economically. You can be well off and still feel empty and isolated, which is what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. Or you could be struggling with money. And I don't think that it's the issue. And I think it talked a little bit about what Janice talked about, which is understanding coping mechanisms and resilience. And that has to do with the internal. So thank you for sharing that, Jen.
Yes.
So I'm going to move on to Deborah. Can you talk a little bit about what you do, day to day?
Sure. So during normal times, I assess patients in the emergency room. I would say a large majority of the patients that I do assess are not self-referred. They're brought in either by local police or EMS. Sometimes they don't want to even be there, and that's okay. I do assess a lot of patients who are struggling with, histories of sexual trauma, physical trauma, domestic violence, suicidal thoughts, actions, self-injury. Basically, I deal almost exclusively with acute psychiatric crises. So it's constantly changing day to day. but what I'm seeing now, and again, this is kind of, I know it's different in different states and cities, but normally if a patient came to the emergency room was expressing thoughts of wanting to harm themselves, I obviously would recommend psychiatric admission for their safety. That's really not an option so much, at least in the state of New Jersey. I know right now, and I don't want to misspeak or be misquoted, but I know a lot of units are being shut down to accommodate COVID-19 positive patients. At my hospital, we had shut down both our psychiatric unit and our detox unit to make room for the COVID patients. In fact, my hospital was to be designated as a COVID-only facility. So what does this mean for the patients that I work with? Well, quite frankly, they're not given the same priority in the emergency room. Someone who's having a psychiatric crisis, what they're going to try to do is kind of like a Band-Aid solution, tape you up, maybe give you a little something to calm you down and send you on your way. There isn't the time, the resources to do assessments. Psych emergency services, like my own department, we're now no longer based at the hospital, again, because the priority is being given to the COVID-19 patients. So it's definitely impacting the work that we do. There just isn't physical room for patients that are requiring inpatient level care. Which is really, really a scary thing. So right now I feel more or less ineffectual with regards to what services I could provide in the hospital setting. I'm very, very grateful that that's not the only hat that I wear. I am a DBT skills trainer. DBT is a cognitive behavioral therapy model that has been proven, it's a best practice or identified as a best practice for, among other populations, people that are struggling with active suicidal thoughts and self-injury. So the timeliness is wonderful. I'm very excited to start my next training in 2 weeks. Again, my first one via Zoom, but I'll get to that later. But the interesting thing about DBT is it really is a wonderful modality for dealing with a lot of the stuff that folks are struggling with now. So we're looking at different things. We have emotion regulation skills training, distress tolerance, things you can do, concrete skills that you could utilize when you're feeling that acute crisis, you're feeling that anxiety. There are also interpersonal effectiveness skills, which are just as important. When you're in a house, some people are now having to live with their parents or family of origin, and that may not make for good times. So working on our interpersonal effectiveness when we're in closed quarters, I think is very, very important.
Oh gosh, yes. And for those of us or the audience that doesn't know what DBT, can you just describe DBT, what it stands for?
Oh, sure. Dialectical behavioral therapy. It was designed by Marsha Linehan. It became popularized in the late 1980s, I believe. I'm saying like 89. And it's a cognitive therapy model. So as opposed to traditional psychoanalysis, we're really not looking at much as the precursors to the situations and circumstances you might be dealing with. It's more of a given. You had stuff happen to you. Okay, now you're here. What are we going to do to try to make the situation better with very, very concrete skills?
Okay, thank you very much. So that actually leads to my next question. I'm going to start with Janice. I've just been reading so much about this issue, done a lot of work around domestic violence. And so, it's like these two things have become, a real problem. And in the last few weeks, I've been reading, about these increases and kind of what's going on, not just in the United States, but as we can see here, we have Jen in Canada. This is a global issue. So I know, Deborah, you talked about the fact, what's interesting that you talked about is the fact that, and I know this because most of my friends are nurses, they're treating COVID patients in hotels. They're blocking off different nursing homes for COVID. They're moving people around. It's such a crazy time. And a lot of the patients that you were talking about, Deborah, can get lost in this movement. And we don't want that to happen. So I want to start with Janice and just ask, what are you seeing in terms of what has helped with the current problem? Anything tactically, physically that you've seen that's been helping people amidst the chaos of the movement of hospitals, around the fact that doctors are now maybe taking on multiple patients? Anything, Janice, in what the city is doing that you might be able to talk about?
Well, I mean, you're right that there's a lot of movement going on, and as we, it's kind of like trying to think about my executive deputy commissioner said, we're building the plane while we're flying it. So a lot is happening, and day to day we're moving and trying to figure out what is the next best step for so many different pieces of this puzzle, because there are lots and lots of moving parts. I mean, I can tell you with regards to the subject matter, in terms of suicide, right now, it's really too soon for us to be able to say that there are changes in the rate or the number of suicides in New York City in particular. Just looking back at what we know as of April 18, we haven't seen an increase in emergency room visits for suicide-related concerns, and that's across all ages in the city. Since the outbreak of COVID. So what we have seen, and I mentioned this earlier, is that there's been a surge in the number of calls to our New York City Well line. That's both in terms of calls, texts, and the chat volume. Since the start of the outbreak, we've seen increases, and we think that that's because we've been promoting New York City Well for people in a variety of communications, both about COVID and about what's available. And we also think it may be due to the stress and anxiety that a lot of folks are experiencing. I mean, I think we're all experiencing stress and anxiety in various levels related to feeling we're in a different place, So the department is really trying to reach out and provide good information about what is the current status of things, and also about the fact that support is out there. I was listening to my colleagues, Jen and Deborah, and thinking, yes, one of the things we want to make sure is that the message is out there that it's normal to feel stressed right now. It's a stressful event upon us. I think it was Deborah who said surreal. It's surreal for all of us. Mm-hmm. Some of this, I can tell you how many times we comment because we try to, at my family, we try to walk every day, and we're saying, wow, this looks like a movie. It looks like a movie, and it feels a little bit like a movie. And so one of the things we want to make sure that there's a message that folks understand it's stressful, it is different. And what we want to think about is really how we can manage some of our feelings of sadness and anxiety and fear, the trouble sleeping that some of us are experiencing, difficulty concentrating, and the variety of symptoms. We want to think about how to manage these so that we can cope with this strange and different place that we're all in together. And again, I can't emphasize enough that staying connected is something that we keep reiterating. Stay connected, because one of the things that happens is we might think, I'm the only one who's thinking this way. And guess what? No, you're not. And there is help available. So let us think about how we can promote and really make sure that in all those far corners and those nooks and crannies of the city and across the world, we really understand about what help, what resources are out there. Here in New York City, we do have resources, and we just want to make sure that the message is out there loud and clear, and that we normalize this feeling of anxiety and stress that so many of us are experiencing, and also reinforce that there are ways that we can speak through coping so that we don't become overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. I like the fact that you talked about the going for walks and thinking it's surreal. Walks are the key. In my own experience, and to Deborah's point, a lot of people are being forced to live in places that they're not accustomed to living in close quarters. Like I said, a lot of patients are in hotels. It's also strange. So that the, you know, just the, when the mayor, I mean, not the mayor, I'm sorry, the governor said, you know, a few weeks ago, you know, just take a walk down the street, use the street because there's not a lot of cars. It gave us a sense of calmness, a sense of, well, we can go out. And I think something for me personally, and I don't know if we want to talk about this, is a lot of people, I was there at 9/11 and I witnessed the whole thing, and we overcame that. So I feel that something that people also need to remember is that we can overcome things instead of, you know, I feel that a lot of, I don't know what you all think of this, but a lot of the anxiety that you were talking about also comes from the watching all the negative news. And I'd like to understand maybe what you all think about people taking a different route in what they consume from the media, in the conversations that they have, because I do think that attributes to a negative way of thinking and feeling. I don't know what you, I'd like to stick with you, Janice, on what you think about that.
Well, I am glad you actually brought that up, because one of the things we think is helpful is limiting screen time and media exposure. It's important to stay on top of what's going on and to have a reliable source of information. Come to the DOHMH website, you'll get that. But that reliable source of information should give you kind of what the facts are without doom and glooming. So sometimes that overexposure of just sitting news program after news program after news program can help to create that feeling of overwhelmedness. So we suggest limiting screen time, sort of putting a certain amount of media exposure in your day, but not overdoing it. 2 or 3 times a day, you've got it. That's enough. You woke up, you know what's going on. You're going to bed, you know what's going on. You really don't need to be sitting there all day long, program after program. So limiting that exposure can sometimes help to be a part of that management process of the symptoms that this strange environment might bring to fore.
Thank you. Jen, I'd like to hear from you in that you work directly with patients that go through trauma, you know, and certainly this is a time where I think a lot of people are just feeling it, whether they come from a history of trauma or this is something new to them. What are some coping skills that you teach that might be helpful in this situation, do you believe?
Well, I think definitely spending some time with yourself, and 100% I would echo what Janice just said. I really think it's important to keep a schedule and a routine. And, even though we're at home, I think, around even sleep times, so sleep hygiene, setting a time when you get up, and maybe it's not as early as your normal work day if you are not working and you're at home, but setting a routine and blocking some time off that's just for you. If you have an exercise routine, fantastic. If you don't, even just some simple movement, moving your body is a way to release stress. So if you like to dance, get up and dance. If you can just even move your arms around, move your body. If you're not going, I really recommend getting out for a walk, like you said, Jasmine, and getting back to your breath. Breath work is so important. Often when we're stressed out, we really shallow breathe. We forget that our breath is our life force. And doing simply, when we feel that overwhelm coming on, I always say in for 8, hold for 4, and out for 7. So, and doing that a few times just can really release a lot of sort of those stress hormones, the things that build up in our bodies. Those are really simple, inexpensive things we all can do. And I really think developing a schedule that you stick to, and that you, it is something you can control. You can control what you do with your 86,400 seconds every day. That's the time you have every day. So with that time, put in some time for light exercise, even if it's a walk, some stretching. Put in some time for hygiene and taking care of yourself, making sure you're cleaning yourself, brushing your teeth. Those are things that feed our sense of wellness, and they're really simple. And I think for some of us, it's getting back to those basics. And, because I know I've heard from some clients that they've saw their old archetypes come back, especially around addiction, at this time.
Yeah.
They're really, and these are people that have been clean and sober for a very long time, and they're in particular, just really, their husband's not working, the financial stuff has come up, and they feel like they want to drink or they want to use whatever it is their addiction is. Maybe it's food that's their addiction. So keeping yourself and your time occupied with things that are going to serve your best care and compassion, and coming up with a table, just like a work schedule, you have an at-home schedule. I've been doing some spring cleaning and finding some projects around the house that occupy my time, that I feel good about, that makes me feel like I've accomplished something, and they keep my mind occupied. So there's a few things that I've been offering up to my clients in really simple ways, to the general public. Everyone can enact these things in their life.
Thank you. I fully agree about the multiple things, but I love that you talked about the schedule, because I think that causes such disarray and chaos when all of a sudden someone that's very structured is presented with zero structure. It seems that they could go down bad spirals. Mm-hmm. So I hope that everyone is listening to that, because I really do think that could be a savior. Deborah, what coping mechanisms, what advice do you have around that?
You have such an amazing panel here, Jasmine, because these ladies, they beat me to the punch. A lot of these very, very basic things that we could do to really help ourselves, it's just wonderful. So I just want to take the opportunity just to, I can't help myself. I have a DOH rep on the call. I have to just throw some questions out there or just share some information. I think access right now is an issue. Again, there's a great difference between the different states we live in, the countries we live in, and even city to city, what's available. But I really think access at this point is really, really been impacted. People that are reliant upon going to outpatient mental health services, be it a 5-day-a-week program or even outpatient counseling, are finding that they can't go. Telepsych, as wonderful as it is in theory, has a lot of problems associated with it. As a clinician, it's very, very difficult to assess someone while you're wearing a mask and they're wearing a mask via an iPad. A lot of what we base our assessments on are assessing affect. I can't assess affect if I can't see your face. We also have to keep in mind some of the problems with telepsych if we're dealing with the elderly or folks that have hearing impairments. A lot of the communication is by reading lips. You can't do that with a mask on. So there are a lot of things that are being provided to kind of help increase access. I just think folks need to be aware of the difficulty. And a lot of the things that we're communicating, the bulk of our communication is nonverbal. So without having the ability to see someone's face, and I know there's a lot of posts online about this, people making comments, you can't see it, but I'm smiling right now. Well, that's a problem. We can't do that. In this forum, it's wonderful. I see you beautiful women smiling and giving wonderful information, but in real time, we don't have that. And that's a problem.
Something that I've been thinking about, I think I read it in the American Medical Association, not even having to do with this podcast at all. I have a client in the addiction recovery space, and I've been mired with doing so much research in that. It's crazy the last 6 weeks. But one thing that's kind of a question that I have for the panel that struck me is just what you were talking about was this lack of the ability to go to group therapy and group counseling. And, what do you say to the person? What would each of you say to a person right now who is, maybe they're on multiple psychiatric medications and they don't have the ability to follow up with their psychiatrist or their group therapist? What do you say to them? Because I think that's really important. We're getting to the heart of the matter here. So what do you say to them? How do you help them? Deb, since you're on the camera, I'm just going to go right to you.
Okay, great. What I'm seeing, and I know that a lot of people are experiencing this, and even a lot of mental health clinicians are struggling themselves, because everyone is. That's one thing. This is kind of a universal struggle right now. Get on the phone, Stay on the phone. Again, it's about connecting and continuing to connect. The reality is you're not going to be able to access those traditional services that were out there. At least not in my area. You can't go to a day program. You're not having a face-to-face appointment. I do know that a lot of therapists are doing sessions via Zoom, via FaceTime, if you will. But, when all else fails, get on the telephone. You can't go to a program where you can call, and I know we were going to share some resources, but there are resources out there. There are hotline numbers you can call. A lot of organizations are now doing streaming support groups for people because of what's going on. So there are a lot of resources out there for the virtual support, but I don't want to take away from the impact of not having the physical and what that impact is on us. But yes, there are things you can do. But again, you can go old school and just pick up the telephone and call someone.
Yeah. Just one other question I'm going to ask to you, and then I'm going to ask to the others as well. What advice do you have for the mental health counselors right now who are unable to continue their practice in that way? Does it change the way that you, besides the obvious physical and virtual, but I guess my question is, it changed the way that you communicate with the patients, or do you have anything to say to the people that are out there, they're in the field, anything that you could say to them?
It changes things. I know a lot of people, and again, not to get into like the legality of it, but a lot of people are concerned about, just the liability of seeing someone or just speaking to someone on the phone. A lot of clinicians really are not comfortable except with the in-person meetings, again, because there are some deficits there. But I know from my experience, granted, it's not ideal, and yes, we are missing things with virtual communication, but I really think it's the way to go. The problem becomes, and again, this isn't the clinician's problem, it becomes the clinician's problem. There are some patients that don't have access to iPhones, that don't have the access to the technology, or aren't comfortable using the technology. So we're having to learn new ways of doing things. So I don't have the answer yet. I don't know what that's going to be. I think, it feels like it's been forever, but in the grand scheme of things, it hasn't been that long that we've been dealing with this. And I think things are going to come up, and we're going to have these struggles. We're going to have to figure out a new way of doing business. And one final thing that I want to say on that is, one of the things that I see is becoming very, very big in the coming months, and this is very unfortunate, and we recently lost a psychiatrist at the hospital to COVID-19, and we're seeing a lot more of that. So I think moving forward, one of the issues that I anticipate dealing with in my work is, how are we helping individuals mourn the loss of the person who gave them their primary mental health support? So I just wanted to throw that out there, something that is going to be in the coming months, because a lot of psychiatrists are still seeing their patients, and they are putting themselves at risk. So then who do you talk to about the loss of your psychiatrist?
That's a tough question. Janice, do you have anything you want to add on this?
Yeah, I'll mention that the department, we are in contact with our contracted mental health care providers, and we're trying to update them and provide them information and support, and we release and distribute guidance on how to provide care for those individuals who you're not able to continue to engage in as pre-COVID. And so these guidance materials are to help them to figure out which services are essential and must be continued, and which services we can sort of back burner for now, how to implement telephonic or video and audio services wherever possible, and a variety of other types of guidance materials. So that's up on our website. Granted, every day a new question comes to fore,
Yeah.
The question you just asked, how do you help an individual who lost their psychiatrist? That's a really big question. And it's one that I believe we haven't attended to that at this moment. But like you said, this is evolving. It's evolving. And I think the best thing we can do is to keep eyes, ears open so that we can understand what's going on the ground and figure out what might be some promising or best practices or ways that we can be flexible to provide the services that need to continue to be provided. In the first place, I think what we've tried to do is, as I said, try to segregate essential versus not essential, hear what's going on, and then have conversations with those who know better in terms of what would be an appropriate approach, and push those guidance materials out to the providers ongoingly.
Jen, can you talk about, I just want to jump in, thank you. I just want to jump into the next question. I have a few more questions and we still have to get to the audience questions. So from your standpoint, what are some of the resources, websites, you mentioned phone numbers for people in New York City to contact? Is it by borough? Is there a general number, general websites that you can point people to, whether they are struggling and feeling isolated, and, God forbid, contemplating suicide in any way, or family members that want to help someone? Can you point to any specific, websites, phone numbers that they could contact?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm asking, that's okay, I'm asking Janice first, and I'm going to go around. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So in New York City Well, it's a confidential 24/7 helpline, and it's staffed by trained counselors. Once you provide a bit of your information, those counselors will give brief counseling and also referrals. We have care in over 200 languages. It's New York City Well, and I can give you that phone number. You tell me when that's a good time to do it. We're going to put it in the show notes for everyone at all. Okay, great. So it can be accessed. Thank you so much. It can be accessed via telephone, text, and even online for chat. We also we suggest using the NewYorkCity.gov coping website. So that's another thing that I can give you. And then, of course, there's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So all of those are, one of the things I think you want to know is that from New York City Well really covers a gambit of mental hygiene services. And that's the one we're pushing forward. But those are others that I'll also give you for the notes.
Okay. And so one question before I go on to Jen. So does it matter, just for anybody who's watching or listening, does it matter if folks have insurance, don't have insurance, they'll still get support and treatment during this situation?
Yeah, so it's a wide variety of service providers, and whatever your status is, call. But the one thing I also want to make sure to say that obviously if in need of immediate attention, 911 or the nearest emergency room. I just want to make sure to put that out there, considering the subject matter.
Thank you very much. Okay, Jen. So any resources, I know you mentioned a few, Psychology Today, which I personally love. So any resources of information or support that you can point to in your area?
Well, I really think that, to sort of go back to your last question that links to this question, I'm seeing a lot of people get involved in their communities and helping the most vulnerable. So the people that can't access those drop-in programs, the people on the streets, the people living with addiction, our shelters here in Canada, at least in Ontario and London, where I live near, sort of in between Toronto, have been, people have been kicked out onto the streets. So through efforts through Pillar Nonprofit, there are amazing efforts happening at the grassroots level to house these people, put them in hotels, get them off the streets. Because if you think about someone who's living in active addiction and with homelessness, they usually panhandle, let's say, generally. People aren't out there, and they're not giving out cash, right? So people are going to starve to death. So I think if people want to get involved and make a difference, making a call to your local Salvation Army or your local soup kitchen, whatever they're called in New York, and seeing how you can make an impact that way by dropping off food, donating food, having food delivered so that people can be fed. I think that's I wanted to just put that out there first, that for people to really think about basic needs of people that are truly are most vulnerable. And then a few resources. So I talked about, I think Janice mentioned the one, because you're from New York, I looked at the suicide prevention hotline, which is 1-800-273-TALK. And that's across the USA. Like, I know it's accessible everywhere. And then there's a really great website called befrienders.org. They are a nonprofit organization. They have support available in, like, I think 50 languages. So again, it's a support that people can access no matter where they are, and in their language. And then the last one, I was just looking it up here, Jewel, the singer, I mentioned her before we came online. She runs an organization called Never Broken. And if you go to neverbroken.com, and sign up. And I know not everyone has this access, but if people do have the access and want the resources, she has like literally hundreds of resources on there, and to connect people with people. So those are three that I would share. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So we'll put those in the show notes. Thank you so much. That's amazing. The more and more that people that can help, do help, is extremely important. So I appreciate that. Deborah, any resources you want to share?
Just to echo my colleagues, the National Suicide Helpline is just outstanding. That's the 800-273-TALK number. But also, and I referenced this before, there are some organizations that are doing virtual support groups. I know that NAMI Metro in New York City does provide now virtual support groups. So it's definitely a great resource for folks that are either struggling themselves or have family members that are struggling. And I do know they offer, a lot of online services and virtual services. So that would be the NAMI New York City Metro.
Okay, we'll have to get that
resources. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we have a couple more questions left, and then we're going to go into audience Q&A. So I guess, two more questions. One is, and Jen brought this up, but I'd like to, I'm in New York, and so I'd like to understand this. For those people that are out there right now that aren't working and they're looking to do something, how can they help? Like, are there, Janice, any ways to volunteer in the New York City area, and Deborah in the New Jersey area, and Jen in your area? So Janice, can you talk a little bit about any ways that we can help, besides doing, podcasts and giving information, any ways that we can help people that may be at risk, and that's important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to Jen's point about activating in the community, yes, this is something that a lot of folks would want to be able to contribute and to use themselves in a way to be helpful. www.nyc.gov/help-now. This is where we can sign up to volunteer for all listeners who are interested. And of course, I will send that to you as well, Jasmine.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Okay, Jen, I know that you mentioned, do you have in your local area, do you have a website that you could point to?
Well, I would direct this to anyone in Canada to contact their local municipal office. So, in London, where I live, it would be london.ca. And through London City, I know on their London portal, they have resources that are listed there. And also Pillar Not-for-Profit is across Canada. And they are, as I see it, really pioneering community programs and access for our most vulnerable, and setting up, I'm part of one that's called the Incubator Hub. And we have people doing things around food security, around mental health and wellness, exercise and movement, all sorts of great things. So Pillar Nonprofit is one that I can see as being, like I said, pioneering, sort of leading the pack in this capacity. So
thank you. Fantastic. Deborah, anything that you can see in your local area in terms of volunteering or support?
Sure. For folks that want to help, it really is wonderful. There are a lot of people out there that want to help, but I can't say this strongly enough. The best way to help, though, is please just stay home. If you want to provide something, I know the hospitals, we have shortages of PPE. If you're you have the ability to donate masks, that would be greatly appreciated. Folks that have the funds available can do it. Contact your local hospitals, nursing homes, facilities. They're in desperate need also of iPads because of the reliance now on that type of virtual communication. That would be greatly appreciated. And you can never go wrong with food. Bringing healthcare providers food does help. So if you want to really have it come from the heart, bake the cookies yourself. Trust me, they will be eaten. They will be appreciated.
Yeah, so I want to reiterate what Deborah said because I think it's very important. Again, you know, most of my friends are in healthcare. Masks, very important. I love seeing in my Warrior Women in Business group and organization all these like really smart, creative women sewing masks and coming up with things. It's awesome. So continue to do it. Baking cookies, not me, but the bakers out there. You know, I do think that we definitely need to help. I see that my friends are overworking. They're working too hard. They have to go home and help their families right after they're working like 13 hours. So please, you know, I love that you said that, Deborah. I think that really helps to build that community strength. So I'm going to go right into the Facebook Live questions. I'm going to read them, and then I'll go around the panel here and see if anybody has something they want to add. So Molly asked, what should I do if I'm worried about a family member that is living alone and I can't go physically to see them because of isolation rules? This is a great question. So Deborah, since you're on camera.
Yeah, that would be a perfect example of calling the local police department to do a welfare check. Police are essential personnel. They go out all the time. I know, I don't know where this question is coming from. Is it someone that has a psychiatric history, has issues like that? Because if that's the case, there are often mobile crisis numbers and folks that go out in the community. But I can say with all certainty, everywhere I've lived, you know, in the tri-state area, you can always call the police to do a welfare check. That's completely appropriate.
Okay, fantastic. Janice, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I agree. I mean, if for some reason you're not able to call that person yourself and get a response, then yes, we would want to make sure that they're actually okay.
Okay. Jen, anything in your area? Is it similar?
Yeah, I think we would handle it in the same way. We also have some community groups that are sort of at the street level that, what are they called? The unnamed. Yeah, the unnamed that will do things like that. And they're working around people that are really high risk people, and they go out, that's what they do. But again, we are in a different time now, right? So keeping yourself safe and making sure, I would probably agree with just what Deborah and Janice said. You know, that's what our police services are there for, to support in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the police also need some fresh cookies and masks. Let's not forget about them. No, I mean, they're tied into what you ladies are doing, and I think they're equally important. Just not on topic, but just quickly, something that came out yesterday, you know, more and more MTA workers are dying. And they need the support just as much as the police, any city, and I'm sure Janice would agree, anyone in the city who's helping out, they also need our support. So I know a lot of people feel like they're sitting around and isolated, but I think to Janice's point, there's lots of ways that we can volunteer and help, right? Okay, so
and you know, another thing, just to push this out, remember there's a chair for healthcare workers. We can make that broader at 7 p.m. Chair for our
oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes, at 7 o'clock, it's like we're having Mardi Gras. I used to live in New Orleans. Every day at 7. And yes, you can cheer, and you know, it's where I'm living now, it's like the pots and pans and people are going crazy with the flags outside the windows. And what I personally love about it is it's like a wake-up call that, hey, you're not isolated. You know? So I agree.
Exactly.
7 o'clock. Okay, a couple other questions. Debbie asked, what can I do to spread awareness what can one person do to spread awareness? Anything you want to say on that, Janice? One person, let's say.
You know, we live in a world where I told two friends and she told two friends and so on and so on and so on. If you are connected to social media, spread the word, use that power. Anything we put in social media is going to multiply. You can connect folks to some of the resources that myself and my colleagues have just spoken to. Put the word out there. You can make a phone call and make it a challenge. I'm going to call you and you've got to pass it on. You know, push it forward. Create a way to start a chain of conversation.
I love it. Super important, super important. And I also find a lot of folks, there's this Facebook group that I got involved with. It's hilarious. It's this virtual happy hour. And one of the rules of that group is you can't say anything negative about COVID. So it's fun and it's very light and people love it. And I think that's it. It's about connecting with other people. So Jen, do you have anything to say on Debbie's question about how do you spread awareness?
I think really, you know, I think about people's words. And so our words and our words carry energy. And so, and then our words become our thoughts and our beliefs and then our behavior. So whatever you're putting out there, yeah, choose it wisely or they'll choose you. So if you want to impact and have a positive message, I would, you know, echo what Janice said. Create those opportunities, use your social media, pick up the phone, and don't make it around negativity, you know, like your happy hour. Have conversations about uplifting topics, about something else that is going to, you know, talk about good memories, about remember the time when, reminisce about great times, and shut the TVs off, right? And all that media. So I think that's how you can make an impact is through the words and the decisions that you make, the choices that you make, and how you I guess, show up, right?
Yeah, how you show up. Deborah, you have anything to say on this, you know, one person making a difference?
You know, a lot of it I think has to do, and Jen was referencing words and the power of words. I think a lot of making a difference, again, it can be on a very much a micro level. It's about just reframing. It's finding that one positive thing that you encountered during the day, even if it's something very, very silly. That's okay, but it's about reframing the situation. And just as words are powerful, we also, I think, have more power than we realize when it comes to how our thoughts can color our emotions. So I really think language is vital there. What we say out loud, what we say to ourselves, what we say to our spouses, we internalize that, and then it perpetuates and self-perpetuates. Emotions tend to do that. So making a difference, just reframing the situation, distract for a little bit. Even if it's something just like Jen, you referenced cleaning and organizing, clean out that utility closet, it will help. And then you can share that experience with someone else. And then they can share it with someone else after that. Very, very basic. Move a muscle, change a thought.
Move a muscle, change. Well, I agree with you. I think the whole point about, you know, you were talking about, Jen, when you wake up in the morning, and I think that sets the tone. When you wake up in the morning, how you think, especially double that with what Deborah was talking about. If you're in a confined space or you're isolated, your thoughts are really going to rescue you, make you feel good. And if you're spreading that message, then you become someone that's connected. So I think these are all really good points. I have another question here. I'm a survivor of suicide. All the information is very important. So, well, that's fantastic. I think that that's what we're here to do. And, you know, I applaud the three of you for sharing so much great information today. It's really, really going to help people. And this episode is not just directed to people that, you know, thank God that you are alive and hopefully thriving, prospering, and connecting with other people. But it's also for people out there that maybe aren't aware of this issue, because you might be able to help someone else and save someone else's life. So just checking, that's all the questions that we have. So I want to thank everyone. I would like to thank Janice so much from the city for being on and taking the time out. Thank you, Jen, for coming from Canada with your wonderfully colorful background, and also just for your, as I mentioned, I take trips to Canada all the time. I'm a hockey player and a musician, so I love Canada, and I'm really glad you came on because this issue isn't just here in New York City. We need support everywhere. Someone in New York might have a relative up there or vice versa. So hopefully this has helped. I want to thank you so much for being on. And Deborah, as usual, I want to thank you for being on and sharing all your tactical advice and helping. I guess I just want to have each of you, again, what contact information can you provide to anyone in the audience that might want to get in touch with you personally? I'll start with you, Jen. You're on the camera, so if anyone
Sure.
wants to-
They can reach out to me at jenhewson.com. That's JenHewson.com. And from there, just, find a way, just go to the contact, and it'll be me personally that reaches out. So.
Thank you. Deborah?
Yes, I can be reached at Deborah@deborahmax.com. Very, very easy as well.
Okay, perfect. Janice?
And I want to take the opportunity to promote New York City Well once again. 888-692-9355 is the best way to reach out to New York City Well, but you can also reach by text if you text WELL to 65173, or the chat, newyorkcity.gov/NYCWell.
nyc.gov/NYCWell, correct?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. All right, so before we all jump off, I want to thank you all. I want to thank our audience. I want to thank whomever asked the questions. Again, just a bit about Warrior Women in Business. Warrior Women in Business is a member organization. It's a movement, and it's really intended to help women grow and prosper in business, but also grow and prosper on the inside. And that's why this is so important. And the last 3 episodes that I've run are really intended to help in any way that's possible. Women, families, relationships, we're all in this together. Everybody does need to know that. And we'll continue to have our online podcast for as long as we need to through COVID, and our virtual events as long as we need to. We're here for you. So please check in on Warrior Women in Business on Facebook from time to time. Any questions that you have, anyone that's out there that says, hey, I have a topic I want to talk to you about, please reach out to us. So again, I want to thank everyone, and we are signing off from episode 23, Warrior Women in Business.